Hi, I'm Velvet with Quality Sewing and Vacuum, and I'm a sewing educator here at one of our 11 locations in the Pacific Northwest. And thank you for joining me for How Do I? Today, I'm going to show you guys how to make a super simple, easy zipper bag. Let's go over our materials we'll need first to create this bag. So here at my little display table, I have all of the things we'll need to make this project. I have a cutting mat, which can be used with a ruler and a rotary cutter. Or if you would prefer to cut out your project using scissors, you can use scissors. I have clips or pins, either you prefer. Standard polyester sewing thread. I have a marking tool to mark my pieces. I have a turning tool. This will help me later on in the project when I turn all of my pieces right side out. And then a variety of sewing feet. So here I have my standard sewing foot. I have a zipper foot, and then an optional overcast foot, which we'll talk about the purpose of that later. Next is our fabric requirements. So here I have a zipper. You want your zipper to be at least 8 inches long. And I have 4 pieces of fabric. I have 2 pieces that are cut 2 by 8 inches. I have a front piece that's cut 5.5 by 8 inches. And then I have my back piece, which is cut 7 by 8. These are all cut from quilting cotton, but you can use a variety of different types of woven fabrics, so non-stretch, to make this project. So we're going to start by grabbing one of our 2 by 8 inch pieces. This piece here I'm going to take over to my iron, and this will become my strap. So we'll start by taking the iron and just pressing out our fabric. Then I'm going to fold this in half to create a crease down the middle of my strip. Once I've created this center crease here, I'm going to open up my fabric and I'm going to press these 2 long edges inward towards that center crease that I've made. Be careful not to get your hands with the iron. Now I'll take this strip that I have here and I'm going to fold it in half again so the raw edges are now hidden inside. Give that a nice press. Now, if you open this up, you can see that I do have my writing still on here. Normally, if I wasn't doing a demonstration, I would want to go ahead and get rid of my markings in whatever way that my marking tool allows me to. So for this option, the marking tool that I'm using, this one actually has a white pen side, and this side is what you use to make your lettering go away. So if I just draw this right over my numbers and my markings, they will all disappear. All right, so refolding that piece back up. We are now going to sew 2 parallel lines of stitching. So you're going to sew 1 line close to the edge where the opening is at, which is where I recommend starting first. Otherwise, what can happen is this strap can start to shift on you. And then the second parallel line will be on the opposite edge where we have the fold. So I'm going to go ahead and put my standard sewing foot on my sewing machine now. On this machine here, which is a Brother, this is a J foot. And I already have my machine threaded with my standard sewing thread as well as a standard sewing thread on my bobbin as well. Now on the front of my screen here, I have my machine set up for just a standard straight stitch. You can leave all of its default settings as they are. If you do not have a machine that has a screen like this, you'll want your length to be set at 2.5 millimeters. Go ahead and place your strip underneath the presser foot so the needle is hitting just the very edge of your fabric. Make sure to put your presser foot in the down position when you sew. and then sew to the very end of your strip. Once you get to the end of your strip, I highly recommend stopping with the needle in the down position so it holds your fabric in place. We're going to do a technique now called pivoting, and this will help a lot later on once we actually put the bag together. So you're going to take your needle, make sure it's down in the machine like mine is. The presser foot is in the up position, and I'm going to take my strip of fabric and I'm going to turn it so I can now sew on the short edge. I'll go ahead and put my presser foot back down and I'll start to sew until I get to my next long edge. Okay, once you've done that, make sure the needle is down again, presser foot up, and then pivot your fabric once more so we can sew along the long edge of our strip. Don't worry about back stitching at this point to do any kind of tie-offs, because the end of our strips here will end up getting sewn into the side seam of the bag, so there's no need to worry about that at the moment. Go ahead and cut your thread, and then any extra tails that you have on the end of your strip here, I'm just going to go ahead and trim that off. This will now be considered the strap of the bag, and you're going to go ahead and set this to the side for the moment while we start on our zipper. Next, you're going to grab your second 2 by 8 inch piece and you're going to grab your zipper. So to attach this, you're going to want to make sure that your long edge here is lined up against the zipper tape. And we are putting these together right sides together. So the right side of the zipper is where the teeth are showing, and the right side of your fabric is this pretty side here. So this is going to go together just like so. All right, so now let's go ahead and sew this. If you would like, this is where you can use pins or clips to help hold everything in place. I feel confident that I can keep it where it's at, but don't hesitate to use some pins or clips along this edge. But do make sure that you take them out as you go to ensure that your needle doesn't hit them. So I'm going to change my presser foot at this point to my zipper foot. The zipper foot is very handy. This will make it a lot easier for us to get close to our zipper teeth. So this foot in particular actually has 2 sections to it. We have our right side and our left side, and which side you use depends on which side of the zipper you're going to be sewing down. So I know that I am going to be sewing on my left side here. So that means that I'm going to be putting the presser foot onto the right side. There we go. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I stay close to my zipper teeth here. So what's really important about this zipper foot is the position of your needle. If your needle is going to be too close to the zipper foot, it will hit it and you'll end up breaking your needle. So you may have to move your needle position on the screen of your machine to accommodate where you have put your zipper foot. So on this model in particular, we have 2 stitches here, both 1 and 2, that indicate left needle position, while 3 and 4 indicate center needle position, and we're okay to leave it in the center for this specific thing. So now that I have my position all ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot down, and I'm going to use the edge of the presser foot here kind of as a guide. This is going to ride up right against the edge of the zipper teeth. At this point, you do want to use your back stitch. So I let it stitch a couple forward. I'll hold down my reverse button here on the front of the machine. Let the machine go backwards, and now I'll stitch forward to the end of my fabric. Feel free to stop and readjust if you need to at any point. And then getting to the end here, we're going to use that reverse again just to tie it off. And then go ahead and remove your fabric. Now we have our first piece attached. So from here is where you have to make a decision. So I want to make sure that my fabric does not come undone and fray over time. And there's different ways that we can do that. I'm going to show you two different options. So for this first option here, I'm going to show you what's called an overcast stitch. An overcast stitch is a stitch that's used on a sewing machine that is going to mimic kind of what a serger does. So it's going to give you a nice clean finished edge and cover up any of those little fraying parts of your fabric. So on my screen here, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to my next set of stitches. We're going to be using 1-17 here. And this is labeled right here as an overcasting stitch. If you don't have a screen that shows all of your stitches, feel free to refer to your manual and they will let you know where your overcast stitches are located. Another really handy thing about this stitch on our brother model here is that we use a G-foot. And that's this guy. So we're going to go ahead and place this on the machine. If you do not want to go along the edge of your fabric, you do not have to. You can always skip this part, but this is a great way to ensure that your project lasts a long time. So on your G-foot here, you'll notice that there's actually a little opening on it here. And this little opening is where you're going to place the edge of the fabric. So the needle rides right up against my edge. Now I'm going to go ahead and stitch from beginning to end to cover up that raw edge of fabric there. As long as you keep your fabric right up against the little guide here in the middle, it's sure to stay right on the very edge. All right, now that we're at the end here, we don't necessarily need to tie off because this end here will end up getting intersected when we put the whole bag together. So we're just gonna go ahead and cut the thread, and then I'll go ahead and pull my fabric out. Now we're gonna go back over to the iron to press this fabric away from our zipper. All right, so take this strip of fabric here and you're going to just gently press it away from your zipper. And I'm going to use the iron to press this down in place. Make sure that if you're using a zipper with plastic teeth that you're not applying a lot of heat to it because you can accidentally melt your zipper teeth. All right, once this is pressed, we're going to go back over to our machine and we're going to use the machine to do a top stitch, which is just a straight stitch right across this edge here to hold everything in place. So back to our standard sewing foot. Make sure that you switch your stitch over back to your standard straight stitch. The other option you could do with this is use the zipper foot if you want to get really close to the teeth. But at this moment, I'm not going very close to the teeth, so I'm not super concerned about using a zipper foot. So from here, go ahead and put your presser foot down and stitch along this edge. All right, time to put on the bottom section, which is going to go on pretty similar to how our top section went on. So you're going to grab your 5.5 by 8 inch square, and this piece is now going to be placed over the top of our zipper right sides together. So here your zipper pull is up and then your fabric, the pretty side, is down, and you're going to line up the edges of your fabrics here. Once again, use pins or clips if they help you. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and change back to my zipper foot. This time, because I'm going to be sewing on the right hand side of my zipper, I'm going to place the presser foot on the left side. Because of the way this zipper foot is designed, I still don't have to move my needle position because it's not going to hit the foot. All right, and go ahead and start stitching. Remember to use the edge of the presser foot as the guide to make sure that you don't hit the zipper teeth. And when you're done, you can cut. All right. So for this edge here, we're going to overcast this in a different way. So if you have a simpler model of sewing machine that may not have overcast stitches on it, you can still get a nice clean finished edge by using a zigzag stitch. So I'm going to go back to my screen here, and I'm going to choose just a standard back and forth zigzag. Then I'm going to place my standard sewing foot back on. This, you will not use a special foot for this, just your standard foot. And what I want to do is position the needle so it is right next to the very edge of my fabric. That way the needle is going in the fabric and out of the fabric, back and forth, to cover up this raw edge. So with this one in particular, I will do a little bit of a back stitch here just to make sure it stays in place. And all I'm doing is watching my needle to make sure that we're hitting the very edge of the fabric and then coming back in and out. Once you've finished, go ahead and cut. And there we have a nice clean finished edge using a zigzag instead. Now we're going to do the same thing we did last time, and we're going to push this larger piece away from the zipper teeth. We're going to iron this, and then we'll top stitch it down. So let's go over to the iron. Perfect. And then to top stitch. So we already have our standard sewing foot on. I'm going to go ahead and choose my straight stitch here. Just kind of using the edge of the presser foot as the guide again. And we'll just stitch right along that edge. Top stitching really ensures that everything stays nice and flat and you get a really nice crisp clean seam. Now we're going to go ahead and attach our strap. So the strap that we made earlier in the video here, you're going to want to take this long strip and we're going to fold it in half. And we're going to take the raw edge and we're going to line it up against the top smaller portion of our bag. So I usually place this kind of right in the middle there. And I let a little bit of my strap hang off the edge. This is one point where I really would use a clip or a pin to make sure that this stays in place. So I'm going to take a pin here and I'm going to place this through all of my layers so it stays down. And then we're just going to use that straight stitch to just kind of tack it in place so it doesn't move when we put the rest of the bag together. It doesn't hurt to use your back stitch at this point to let it stitch over it more than once to ensure that this stays. Now I'll go ahead and cut. And I can remove my pin. All right, now it's time to assemble the rest of the bag. So go ahead and grab your 7 by 8 inch piece of fabric here, and we're going to lay this over the top of our outside bag, right sides together. Before we do that, we're going to want to make sure that our zipper is open. If we were to sew it right now as it is, we would leave the zipper pull out of our bag and we would end up with a closed bag that we can't open. So we're going to go ahead and pull that zipper at least about 1/4 of a way open, and I'm going to place my fabric over the top, right sides together. This is also another opportunity where I highly recommend using pins or clips to hold everything in place. So something you usually encounter a lot with bags when you're making them is that these two ends of the zipper tape try to kind of pull apart when you're about to sew. So another tip that I like to give is that I hold them together when I pin them down. And this is where I'll actually use 2 pins super close to each other. So I'll put one going through the side like so, and one through the other side. That way it keeps the tape in place so it doesn't move around when you're going to sew this together. Now, if it ended up where one side of your bag is a little bit longer than the other, that's okay, it happens. What I recommend is just pinning and clipping all the way around, and then this edge right here we can trim off here in a moment. So we're going to actually sew this together using just a standard straight stitch first, and then we will end up using our overcast or zigzag stitch to go around the parameters of the project just to give us that nice clean finished edge again. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start here at the bottom, and we're looking to use about a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this part of the project. So what that means is we can use the edge of the presser foot as the guide for a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but we're going to want to move our needle position over to the left. So I'm going to choose the first stitch here on the screen to put the position over to the left side. Now I'm going to line up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of my fabric. So remember, mine ended up a little big, which is okay, that happens. We're going to line up the edge of the presser foot against the shorter part of our fabric because we're going to cut this off later. So I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot down and I'm going to sew. At this point, you will want to use your back stitch at the beginning and end of this. We're going to stitch all the way around the square, but highly recommend back stitching because it will keep everything together permanently. All right, so once you get to the end of your fabric here and you're ready to pivot, make sure that you leave the needle in the down position and your presser foot comes up. At this point, I like to test to make sure that the edge of my presser foot is still going to line up against the edge of my project. So I'll turn it, put the presser foot down, and then double check that it lines up against the edge. If it's not, then you'll want to lift your presser foot back up and then sew another stitch or two just to make sure that it actually meets to the edge there. Looks pretty good to me. At this point, I can go ahead and take off my clips and then sew again. Now, since I'm using a zipper with plastic teeth, I can sew right over the top of this teeth and it won't affect my sewing. All right, needle position down. Presser foot up, so the foot will hover here. Make sure you put the presser foot back down when you start to sew again, and then sew at that 1/2 inch. So once I get close to the pin here is when I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. Let it sew over the teeth. Pull out your second pin and then continue. So once you get back to where you began, you're just going to want to make sure that the lines line up. Do your reverse stitch to tie it off, and then cut your thread. Now from here is where I'm going to cut off the excess. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim off this little bit of fabric here, and I can also trim off the ends of my zipper tails because I'll no longer need those. And I'm just going to trim them right up to the edge of my fabric here. Put my scraps to the side because I don't need those. And now our final step here is we're going to overcast the edge of our fabric. So for sake of time, I'm going to use a zigzag because it is a little bit faster. Make sure you line up that needle against the edge of the fabric, or if you're using that overcast or G-foot, then you're making sure that you're riding the edge of your fabric up against the little guide on the foot, and then go ahead and stitch. Once I get to the end here, I will cut my thread, and then I'll go ahead and start on the next side. It is a little tricky to pivot when you're using the overcasting or the zigzag stitch, so I'd recommend just finishing off the end and then picking up where you left off. It will get a little bit thick once you start to hit the area where the strap is inside of the bag here, but don't worry, it should go over it just fine. You might have noticed I'm not necessarily back stitching at these ends either, and that's because I'm stitching back over it when I pivot to go to the next side. So it's not really necessary to do that. All right. Time to turn our bag right side out. So if you want, you can always trim these little thready bits that are coming off the edge here, but I'm not going to worry about them too much today. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll stick my hand inside the bag just to open up the zipper the rest of the way because it makes it a little easier to turn it right side out. And then we're going to go ahead and press out all of our pieces. And this is where that turning tool really comes in handy. So if you want really nice crisp corners, you're going to use your turning tool, and we're going to poke this into each one of these corners here. This ensures we don't rip through the fabric if we were to use something sharp, and gives us a nice clean finish. My final step here is going to be ironing this bag just to make sure everything looks nice and pressed. So let's go back to the iron one more time. All right, and here we are. A super simple zipper bag. So thank you so much for joining me today for another segment of How Do I? Feel free to follow us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for many more amazing sewing videos just like this one. Have a great rest of your week.